so long, and yet is so well remembered. Yes, it's extraordinary, but she was unique.
I remember just staggering out up the stairs into the daylight and thinking, my God, I've never heard anything like that really before in my life.
What is life to me without thee? What is left if thou art dead?
She was not spoilt by success, but my gosh, she was a star.
I don't think I've ever heard anything quite so human and basic as the sound she produced. Terribly moving, and it reaches right in there, which was her great gift, of course.
When Kathleen Ferrier died at the age of 41 in October 1953, she was as famous as the newly crowned Queen Elizabeth. In just 12 short years, she had climbed from nowhere to sing on the stages of the world's greatest concert halls, working with the world's finest conductors and musicians. She combined a glorious voice with a remarkable ability to communicate with an audience. And yet, she somehow always remained our Kath, a northern girl with a heart as big as a boot.
Look out, microphone, here I come.
You know, if anyone had told me when I was 20 that at 32 I should be dashing about singing at concerts, I should have laughed my head off. I should have said that no one could make a career in music without going to the Royal Academy, and anyway that it was much too risky a way of earning a living. Now here I am. Fantastico, isn't it?
Kathleen, Kath, clever Kath, not so clever Kath, clever question mark Kath, Katie, our Kath. Kathleen Ferrier was born in Higher Walton, just outside Blackburn, in 1912.
Blow the wind southerly, southerly, southerly. Blow the wind south o'er the bonny blue sea. Blow the wind southerly, southerly, southerly. Blow, bonny breeze, my lover to me.
It seems trite to say this, but the most often played extract is the unaccompanied folk song Blow the Wind Southerly. And to me, it encapsulates her entirely.
Might be it the bark that is bearing my lover to me.
You're getting the glory of this human sound, her genius with words, and the way she makes them as a Lancastrian, that roundness of vowel, the way she sounds the words, is her. It just describes her so exactly. The simplicity of the person and this directness. There is nothing like the directness of unaccompanied singing to reach the heart.
Kathleen's father was a headmaster. Her mother, a frustrated housewife with ambitions for her children. She had an older brother, George, and a sister, Winifred.
From the time that she could toddle, she really became the humorist of the family. I think really Kathleen inherited the best characteristics of both her parents. Her father's happy, smiling enjoyment of life, and her mother's temperament, which could reach the heights and the depths.
Kathleen's first love was the piano. She soon became a familiar sight in Montague Street, swinging her music case as she made her way to her lesson.
Considering that she had such a light-hearted attitude to life generally, she seemed to become a different person when she played. She went in for examinations and always passed at the first attempt, and she entered for a lot of the competitive festivals in Blackpool, Lytham, Liverpool, and the various towns in the north of England.
At this point, her singing was confined to the bathroom, much to the annoyance of her family.
I said to her, well, weren't you all amazed, didn't you all sort of stand outside the bathroom door listening to this amazing voice? And Wynne said to me, no. She said, my father used to get really annoyed and used to beat on the bathroom door and say, Kath, get out the bath, stop it, get out, we're all waiting to come in. And it just sounded to me like a very, very loving, very warm family.
I think of Blackburn and my school days with deep pleasure, and my great regret in that I had to leave so early. In my particular work, how grateful I should have been for fluent French, German and Italian.
And then, when Kathleen was a teenager, the Ferrier family fractured. Her brother George, too often in trouble, was sent to live in Canada. Her parents, worried about having to finance his return, took Kathleen out of school. At 14, she began to work as a trainee at the telephone exchange at a salary of 8 shillings a week. 2 years later, she was promoted and moved to the chief engineer's office, which meant regular hours, not shift work, leaving her evenings free for her music.
Her solo piano playing was very, very good. But as the time went on and she accompanied more, I think her leanings were more to accompaniment in that way, because she was keen on the songs by then, and she'd pretend to sing them in various voices. So I think that singing then was born a bit there.
Mrs. Wilson.
And our 4 semi-finalists, please. Mr. Campion, your 2 minutes on the life of Kathleen Ferrier, starting now. Kathleen Ferrier was married in November 1935 and sang for a short time under her married name. What was it?
Mrs. Wilson.
Correct.
Kathleen was 21 when she met Albert Wilson, an assistant bank manager. They shared a love of dancing, and after a few months they became engaged. But as plans for the wedding went full steam ahead, Kathleen began to have her doubts. In later years, she confessed to her sister that she had felt trapped by circumstances and could see no way of calling the wedding off. Winifred, for her part, always felt they were unsuited and that Bert took her sister for granted. During this period, Kathleen took part in her first singing competition in Blackpool. It was not a success, and soon after, she married Bert.
In Winifred's words, Kathleen dreaded every moment of her, I think maybe even every night of her honeymoon, which is odd considering the honeymoon was in fact spent with Winifred. If you look up the Blackburn papers for the day in the 30s when the marriage was, it says that the happy couple left for a honeymoon in the south. It doesn't say that they left for a honeymoon with the bride's sister in the south.
Kathleen left the post office after 9 years, as rules prohibited married women from working. Bert was promoted, and they moved to Silloth to live above the bank. She passed the time by giving piano lessons. Whatever their problems, it was in fact Bert who inadvertently set Kathleen on the path that within a few short years would consume almost every waking moment, giving her no time for relationships, let alone marriage. When he bet her a shilling that she wouldn't enter the Carlisle Festival singing competition, Kathleen couldn't resist.
Down by the Sally Gardens, my love and I did meet. She passed.
Mrs. Wilson was on her way, thanks to Bert, and began to build a reputation across the northeast of England. 2 years later, she met the man who changed her voice forever.
At the Carlisle Festival in April 1939, who was the adjudicator for the Cumberland News Trophy, who declared that the beauty of her voice stood out like a beacon and who later became her vocal mentor?
Hutchinson.
Correct.
As a worker, I think she was prodigious, absolutely prodigious. She did far, much more than she should have done. When I tell you that our lessons, which were supposed to be half an hour long, developed into, well, I knew I'd gone on at least an hour and a half with her at times. And we were both literally worn out, but she wouldn't give in.
Hutchie, as Kathleen affectionately called him, recognized the quality of the instrument she possessed. She, in turn, blossomed as the lessons became the high point of her week. When war broke out, Kathleen Wilson's life altered irrevocably. Bert was called up and the enforced separation effectively ended the marriage. Kathleen was now free to pursue her career wherever it might take her.
Carlisle to Covent Garden in 5 years. A darn industrious diva.
As her voice developed, she began singing regularly across the north.
Hello, love. Have been singing practically every weekend somewhere, and am making my debut under Hutchie a week on Sunday as Kathleen Ferrier. Shivers and shivers. I shall need a lot of pennies that day.
Determined to succeed and always looking for opportunities, Kathleen wrote to the BBC.
Dear Sir, I am writing to ask if I might have an audition in the near future at your studios. I am a contralto and include in my repertoire solos by Bach, Handel, Purcell, Schubert, hoping to receive a favourable reply.
She was turned down, and the report read, rich clarinet-like quality voice, limited in range and technique at the moment, good diction, a promising singer, but only suitable at present for small works such as Bach's songs. She sang the chansons completely without passion. Now that doesn't sound like the Kathleen Ferrier that we all got to know.
She may not have been good enough for the BBC, but she was invited to join CEMA, the Council for the Encouragement of Music and the Arts, the organisation which arranged concerts to raise morale during the war.
We did a lot of village concerts, and I remember hunting for one in the North Riding of Yorkshire with Kathleen on board. We got hopelessly lost. And at one point she said, I think this is the left turn. And I said, I don't know, I think it looks a bit funny. And I got out and walked straight into a river ford. The bit she'd suggested was the village pond. It looked nice and loose, smooth and black. So we avoided that and found the hall. And not a bit deterred, she said, oh, look, while you're getting the car parked, just let me get in and get on with it. And by the time I got in and followed her in, she changed into an evening frock and was sailing onto the platform as though nothing had happened at all.
She had performed. They had gone absolutely mad. So she went to give an encore. And she just stood in front of these thousands of people in the canteen and said, art thou troubled by G.F. Handel? We kept on saying all her life, are you still troubled by G.F. Handel?
She was a very easy musician. I mean, she could play around with things. She'd suddenly transpose the piece to another key and give her singer a shock, you know.
Do you know Maxwell from Brazer Bonnie? You know, Maxwell from Brazer Bonnie. Hey, used to tease my father very much.
I think she was very unconscious of her charms, and certainly didn't try to put it over at all. She was awfully good looking and 5'10" tall, and held herself well and remained so simple and straightforward. The other artists who heard her all said, "You must come to London to make a career," and engineered it for her. So the transition was made easy. What wasn't easy for her was taking the plunge, because she'd always been used to a sort of provincial, safe life. It was an absolute step in the dark. She hadn't yet got enough engagements to live on.
On Christmas Eve 1942, Kathleen moved south to London with Winifred and their widowed father.
We are more or less settled in, have been in a terrible mess, with painters, electricians, joiners and plumbers, but we're looking posh now. I made my London debut last night at the National Gallery, and oh boy, did my knees knock. There was a huge crowd there, and it was a bit of a facer, so I was glad when it was safely over. Work is rolling in, and I'm pretty well booked up until the end of April, which is just as well the price of rents.
I think the war itself brought out something in this country. The song she sang, especially, I suppose, What is Life, at the end of the war, and the place that she came from, must have played a part in her appeal, as well as the kind of sheer beauty of her voice. I've always felt there's a kind of sense of Britishness, not just even Englishness, in Ferrier's songs.
Now sleeps the crimson petal, now the white. Now weeps the cypress in the palace walk.
She had great warmth, I mean, in herself, and a most outgoing sort of warmth and kindness. And I think, in a curious way, that came through her singing, so that when she's singing to an audience, she, well, it sounds rather silly, I know, but she sort of embraced them in the music that she was singing, and so that they felt the warmth and the love and everything that she gave out all the time, which she did with such unstinting generosity.
She used to stride onto the platform, this tall, elegant woman, very, very different kind of figure from the large prima donna they were all used to, with a tremendous sense of Lancashire warmth. She gave a new impetus to performing, in the sense that people could somehow connect with her.
The most important factor in seeing and hearing her was the radiance. There was a radiance on the platform.
There was something which marked her out. You know, if you'd got an oratorio platform of four singers, she was the one who stood, as it were, apart.
By anyone's standards, Kathleen Ferrier's rise was meteoric. By the end of the war, she was performing up and down the country. She had an agent, a recording contract, and a new singing teacher, Professor Roy Henderson. Her gamble had paid off. She was now an artist of national repute, good enough even for the BBC.
The BBC asked us if they could do a live broadcast of our performance of the Messiah. The atmosphere and the quality of the sound that came across, especially Kathleen's interpretation of the words, I think. We were so proud of the fact that she was a Blackburn girl, you see. One of the things that you remember and think, oh yes, that's our Kath.
Kathleen was working at an alarming rate. In 1 month alone, she sang Handel's Messiah 17 times. Perhaps her most significant performance was at Westminster Abbey in 1943. In the audience was Benjamin Britten.
Here was a voice that could sing this extremely awkward music without any effort. Just in the part of the voice which is usually the weakest, Kathleen's voice was the strongest.
Kathleen Ferrier had a natural cavity of a mouth, and if you had a small apple in your hand and you lobbed it across the room into her open mouth, it would go straight down her throat. She had a wonderful open throat.
Later, when Britten composed The Rape of Lucretia, he remembered Kathleen's voice.
I was asked if I'd consider singing the part of Lucretia. Heavens! Could I even walk on stage without falling over my own rather large feet? Not to mention having to sing at the same time.
I think it was just an immediate, inspired and inspiring relationship, simply because what concerned both of them in a way was just getting the music across. I mean, that's what she did, and that I think he would have adored and admired and valued above everything else, and she could do that, as we know.
Last night, Tarquinius ravished me and took his peace from me and tore the fabric of our love.
It was very intensive work in those lovely surroundings, and I don't know how many weeks they worked, but they worked for quite a period. And of course for Glyndebourne itself it was quite a challenge to reopen with a new opera, having in the past just done mostly Mozart. So it was quite an adventure for them as well.
The beginning was always marvelous. I mean, she sang it beautifully. She didn't find the music as difficult as I think she felt she was going to find it. And her natural beauty, sitting there on the stage, as soon as the curtain went up, one realized that this was Lucretia. It was only slowly, I think, that Kathleen developed the right kind of confidence for the later scenes.
I couldn't believe how difficult it was just to do the simplest arm movements without feeling like a broken windmill. I used to practice them everywhere, on the lawn, in my room, for hours in front of my mirror. It was hard going, and I was an embarrassed beginner. At last the dress rehearsal came, and I had an unsuccessful struggle to change gowns and shoes in 4 minutes, and missed my entry. Then, having stabbed myself, I fell like a hard-baked dinner roll. What a life.
Kathleen's performance in The Rape of Lucretia was well received. It toured nationally and marked her debut at Covent Garden. The following year, Kathleen returned to Glyndebourne to sing Orfeo. But this time, the experience was not so happy. She had problems with the conductor, Fritz Steedry.
The stage manager has brought me a lovely lyre of heavy plywood to get used to. It's going to make a lovely weapon when Steedry tries me too far. One of these days he won't know what hit him. He still shrugs his shoulders in despair, calls me an oratorio singer, and shouts himself hoarse. Have been doing about 14 hours a day, but last night I went to the local with the stage manager and had a dirty big pint. Did me a lot of good.
It made quite an impact on me, aged 12. It was one of those star performances. She didn't behave like a diva and all that type of stuff. She was somebody who assumed the role. She was not spoilt by success, but my gosh, she was a star. And one felt that with her performance of Orfeo.
Yours till hell freezes over.
Kathleen's capacity for friendship
She was very entertaining indeed. She's a great storyteller, some of them not too polite. And we used to laugh a lot, I remember, when we were with her, always.
Well, she was great fun. She was great fun.
Yeah, we mustn't think that she was some kind of an angel. Well, she was angelic to work with, but she had her very, very funny side. She wanted to make us laugh, and she told us some limericks which one cannot repeat, because they really are very, very blue limericks.
There was a young lady of Nantes, très chic, jolie et élégante. Her hole was so small she was no good at all, except for la plume de ma tante.
In her encores, which are often folk songs, she absolutely opened up, and then there's recordings of her singing at a party, I think after she'd had a few, and she absolutely lets her hair down. What's the song she sings? She
sings Will o' the Wisp.
There's a terrific sense of bawdiness in her letters. Actually, lots of limericks, what you might call double entendre jokes. You get the feeling of a woman of quite substantial appetites, whether it's for cigarettes. She smoked cigarettes a lot. She smoked a brand called Passing Cloud, a rather a superior brand, little oval cigarettes. She drank. There's references to drinking dirty big pints. Food was a big thing for her as well. One wonders about her appetite for, say, sex, and that's one of the great mysteries. It deserves to be a mystery. Will be a mystery forever, I guess, now.
She once wrote that she was a lone she-wolf. She did have a long-standing relationship with an antiques dealer from Liverpool called Rick Davis. But in the long run, it didn't really work out because she wouldn't sacrifice or couldn't sacrifice her career.
It's not enough to be devoted. You have to be obsessed. And when you are obsessed with your music, then you can put the energies in that you need to gather within yourself so that you can then give them to your audience.
One of the most important and perhaps difficult things performers have to learn is coming through all the technical years of struggling to refine what they're doing, learning. It's a great learning process, and eventually they reach a point where they're pretty well established in the way they're going to work. And at that point, it's a very interesting moment in their lives. Some people walk through that final door, which takes a lot of courage, because you are actually revealing yourself as an individual human being. This is what I have to say. I'm giving you this music, but I'm saying it in the only way I can, which is totally individual. And somebody like Ferrier had that kind of courage to a tremendous degree.
Whoopee! Blue skies, sparkling water, and millions of flowers. Wish you could see it.
Kathleen Ferrier's first international engagement was in Holland. It was also her very first trip abroad.
Arrived all in one piece and enjoyed every minute. Ben, Peter and Eric met us at Amsterdam with a bouquet of roses for all the girls. We had tea in a little cafe and had fun pointing out which cake we wanted, and Ben couldn't reckon up his change at all, guilders and cents. The customs was easy. I was asked if I'd any inner tubes or bicycle tyres, so I said no, only a spare tyre round me waist. What a to-do.
The Dutch audiences were enthusiastic, and Peter Diamant, her Dutch agent, immediately began making plans for her return as a solo artist. It was the beginning of a love affair with Holland. Kathleen returned again and again during her short career, 3 times in as many months in 1948 alone.
If there was one musical culture in Europe during this whole period, it was Holland. Holland was ready and generous and wanting to receive that, particularly because of the appalling horrors of that Nazi occupation, which was a really terrible period for that country.
The Dutch are very musical and I think very faithful to the people they admire. And she had the then director of the Holland Festival, Peter Diamant, was also a close friend. And she just felt very at home there, I think.
It's simply lovely to be here, and I'm having such an easy time, though an average of a concert every other day. I've had a real rest, and feel I'm not singing so badly, and have ravishing notices. I get bouquets at every performance, 3 at The Hague, and am being ruined. All the clothes are on point, so there's nothing to buy. But it's a pleasure to walk around Amsterdam with its canals and trees and lovely houses.
At Kathleen's first solo appearance, there were only 150 people in the audience. What happened next was extraordinary. A radio broadcast and an ecstatic review on the front page of a newspaper the following day led to the remaining performances selling out within hours. Her singing of more sombre music, which had always moved audiences, struck a particular chord with the Dutch.
She could have entire orchestras in tears, and indeed quite hardened people like Herbert von Karajan dabbing his eyes. So she certainly could make people cry, and she certainly cried herself. And where that comes from, I don't know. I mean, her sister, I think, said that she had been very aware of a kind of cancer as an agent of death from a very young age, because she had seen a neighbour die slowly of it. And I think, again, according to Winifred, that she had been aware of something wrong with herself from as early as kind of 43, 44, which is an amazing thing if true. But certainly, I think there was certainly an awareness in Ferrier's voice that life is not a bowl of cherries all the time, and a great kind of haunting melancholy in it, which I think it'd be very, very hard to properly explain. But it certainly found a response in the people who listened to her.
It was also in Holland that Kathleen found herself at the forefront of the post-war revival of the composer Mahler, banned during the Nazi occupation.
I don't think it has been sufficiently recognised that Kathleen Ferrier played a very vital role in creating the new culture with regard to Mahler, his reception in post-war Holland and elsewhere. In retrospect, we see her as one of the founding artists who really changed the way people heard and thought about the music of Gustav Mahler. One of the most striking contributions made to that was by Kathleen Ferrier, in association, of course, with Bruno Walter in that incredible performance of the work at Edinburgh in 1947.
My greatest good fortune has been working with Dr. Bruno Walter. To work and learn with him the works and songs of Schubert, Schumann, Brahms and Mahler is to feel that one is gaining knowledge and inspiration from the composer himself. It is truly memorable to rehearse with him. It is very exciting and sometimes almost unbearably moving.
People were hungry for music at that time. I mean, there weren't, we were just after the war and we were desperate for some high culture. And Edinburgh provided that. And probably that performance of the Mahler was just about the apex of that festival.
You come nearest to hearing what she was like on stage in the recital that was recorded live with Bruno Walter at the Edinburgh Festival. There's as there so often is in live performances, there's an extra something in every performance, both of happy and tragic songs, and there I feel almost that the Ferrier is again in front of me.
The extraordinary radiance of the voice, I still remember that, the extraordinary enveloping, overwhelming beauty of Ferrier's voice.
I think it's very important to remember that Bruno Walter did teach her how to sing German and how to sing Lieder, and you could see the great rapport between them and how Walter very much played to her singing, and it was obvious from what he said afterwards what a profound influence she had on him apart from him on her.
Such rare beauty, beauty of expression, beauty of voice, and purity and beauty of personality is one of my greatest impressions in my life. And since then, we became very great friends.
It was Bruno Walter who introduced America to Kathleen. She arrived in New York for a series of concerts with him at Carnegie Hall in January 1948. Life is good. Already a major star in Europe, Kathleen stands on the brink of international success. She is 35 years old. The pinnacle of her career is in sight.
Here I am in New York and taking it in my stride. What a city! It is just a fairyland of good things and wonderful buildings. I had a day's shopping on Saturday and bought some beautiful pony skin boots and a pair of shoes and 2 woolly pants, a banana, some Lux soap, face cloth, blackcurrant and glycerin sweets, all without coupons. There seems to be terrific excitement about this concert, and all 3 booked out, so I must do my stuff. It was very disappointing. The audience was lousy. When I walked out, there was a handful of clapping. I was stunned. I thought I must have dropped my pants. I suppose it's good for one not to hit the headlines all the time, but I did want to on this occasion.
From New York, Kathleen went on a month-long tour of America and Canada. It was tough. In those days, the artist was responsible for all expenses and bills, and for the first time in her life, she was in debt. She hated it.
The hotels that she stays in, one of them is so bad that she deliberately leaves a tide mark on the bath, a sort of act of revenge. And another one is so good, it has such a wonderful toilet that she won't use it.
My big recital is tonight in this hotel in the ballroom. It is snowing horizontally across my windows. The manager has just sent a bellboy up with a silver bowl with an apple, orange, pear, banana and a bunch of grapes, not to mention a fig leaf. I'll never pay my bill.
When she went back in 1949 and then in 1950, it was a different Kath. She was the person who dictated the itinerary and where she sang, how much she got, what she was responsible for, what she wasn't responsible for.
I know where I'm going, and I know who's going with.
I'm just dashing to catch a train to Canada. Eee, if my mother could see me now. The hall was packed, and from the first they purred. So different from Ohio, where half the audience were knitting. I told him I was the highest paid artist in England and was wanted in every country on the continent. And if I was going to suffer and not enjoy my work, I wanted well paying for it, not go home penniless. He's the one who talks about not working me too hard. Bollocks. And I said I was in the bleeding Rockies and they never heard of
fit as a
Orpheus
flea,
there. And I haven't had a cigarette since I left the boat. In fact, I'm too good to live. Only I hope no one's listening, 'cause I like it just the same.
When she left in 1950, she was already booked to return the following autumn. It was an engagement she would be unable to keep.
Aren't I lucky?
Like Benjamin Britten and Bruno Walter, Sir John Barbirolli became a great friend and mentor.
John was never in a very good mood when he had to conduct in Sheffield, which he did once a week. And he had Kathleen as a soloist because the orchestra were raving about her, and he always took notice of what the orchestra said. And when she came, I don't think he was disappointed with her, but he couldn't get what he wanted from the orchestra. And he threw his score at somebody, which is something he never did. He almost never lost his temper, but he did then. And of course, Kathleen was terrified, and she brought this back at him all the years we knew her. The first meeting wasn't that happy.
He was very much a father figure to her, in a different way from Walter, I think. Walter, I imagine, trained her much more, probably worked on songs and taught her the German way of singing. But I think that Barbirolli was a more instinctive and a more spontaneous father figure to her, and I'm sure, well, obviously they had an enormous rapport.
He could see that she was becoming the English oratorio contralto, and he didn't want that to happen, and so he worked on things like, it was the chanson, wasn't it, the poème de l'amour et la mer, extending her upper range, things which she thought she really couldn't cope with, tessitura, lie of the voice, much higher.
Bruno Walter was very surprised about that, and he said to John once, "What have you done to her? Because she's gone up." She started staying with us in Manchester whenever she sang up there, because it was convenient and that sort of thing. So, of course, we got to know her then. And then she decided she'd love to come on holiday with us. We had a house in Sussex. So she came there for about a week. And so gradually it grew, but of course with John especially, it grew musically, because he loved her musicality and the way she sang and the way she behaved, everything about her. I think everybody loved her, really. We weren't alone in that, but we just got to know her very well.
The marvellous thing about this Olympian fortitude of this wonderful person, that as it grew nearer and nearer to the end, she became greater and greater, as if the Almighty had arranged that this must fulfill itself before it left, and it did.
Hell, hell, hell.
In January 1951, Kathleen's luck began to run out. While on tour in Italy, she received the news that her beloved father had died. Worse was to follow. On her return to England, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent a mastectomy.
Things have been happening to me since I wrote to tell you about my pop. I had discovered a bump on my busto, and after much X-raying had one bust removed. Now I have to have 6 weeks of ray treatment, which is sick-making, lazy-making, and rather depressing. But so far I'm holding my own. Please don't broadcast what's wrong with me, because it's unnecessary, and I have wonderful camouflage, and things get so magnified in the telling.
She said afterwards that she was just afraid she wouldn't be brave enough to cope, but she came through it very well, and as soon as she was out of danger, she was sitting up in bed, chatting again, talking to her friends, having lots of visitors. She had behind the curtain a collection of bottles of gin and vermouth and all the rest of it, so that she could give her friends drinks when the time came. And so she coped wonderfully with this situation.
My stay in hospital was the pleasantest possible, and I have just about been ruined by kindness. My birthday was riotous. The hospital chef icing a gorgeous cake, and visits from Ben Britton and Peter Pears and many musical buddies, and all the sweet nurses trying to find an excuse to come and peep at Ben Britton. Flowers from Barbara Raleigh and Malcolm Sargent. Just ruined, darling, I am.
A few days after her birthday, Kathleen was told that secondary symptoms had been located and that she would have to continue radiation therapy.
I'm still going to hospital for rays each day. I have only been slightly queasy on a few occasions, when they seem to lay most people completely out, making them violently sick, anemic and suicidal, so I'm feeling cocky. And with the end in sight, I perk up each day. 2 million volts is quite a lot of current going into one's innards, isn't it?
Nevertheless, just 10 weeks after her operation, Kathleen flew to Amsterdam to take part in the Holland Festival.
She was a youngish woman to have breast cancer, still before the menopause, at the time when she got it, and she'd obviously had it some time and concealed it, as indeed a lot of women used to do in those days. There was no way of telling whether the tumour might have spread at the time of the mastectomy operation, which of course sadly in her case it had.
The following year, despite still being seriously ill, Kathleen travelled to Vienna with her assistant, Bernie Hammond, to record Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde with Bruno Walter. By now, she had cancelled numerous engagements both at home and abroad, and was receiving almost continuous radiation treatment. She was in considerable pain much of the time, and it's impossible to listen to the recording they made during those extraordinary, heartbreaking days without taking the personal circumstances of the artists into account. Bruno Walter, the composer's friend, and Kathleen, who perhaps knew that it was her own farewell, that she might only see the lovely earth grow green again once more. Like Mahler, she rose to the challenge of a death sentence by reaching for perfection in her art.
On the last afternoon, when they'd finished the final recording, we were all sitting in a small room to hear the final tape.
When it was finished, I always feel that time completely stood still, just for a few seconds. There was that absolute stillness. And nobody said anything, and then Kath quietly walked over to Brunewalter, and she looked at him and she said, "Was I all right, love?" And the look on Brunewalter's face was just so incredibly beautiful, really. He had no words either. He just didn't have words to say to her.
I do very well remember the last term I had in Lied van der Erde in November 1952 at the Festival Hall. And one then knew that she was very ill. And I remember she was worried about a draft or something, and she threw a shawl around her. And you then, I think, felt the tragedy and timelessness of Lied van der Erde even more than one had in her earlier performances.
I remember that performance, and I remember how it was Cripps, wasn't it? Joseph Cripps was the conductor. And he turned very deliberately to her, and in a high German fashion, clicked his heels and bowed, you know, and I felt that was a special salute.
After the thrill of being awarded the CBE in the new Queen's first honours list, there remained one final professional mountain to climb, Orfeo at Covent Garden in February 1953, conducted by Sir John Barbarolli. Since their concert performances of Orfeo, Sir John had wanted to stage the opera. The previous summer, he and Kathleen had translated the Italian libretto.
I still have the copy because I think the translation was a little inept. So they altered that a good deal of laughter, I think, sometimes. But I think she did enjoy Orpheus, despite the fact that she was so ill at the time. Maybe she knew that it was the last time, I don't know.
In the morning, when she got up, it was agony for her to move. And we had to get down a spiral staircase and out across the snow and into a taxi. And it required a tremendous amount from her to do this. But when we got to Covent Garden, the most fantastic thing used to happen, because somehow or other, the pain seemed to go. And as soon as she got onto the stage, she was walking around normally. And I used to feel every time I saw this that I was watching a miracle.
I remember coming in here and there was great excitement because Kathleen was performing and she came in for rehearsals. And I'd heard about her, you know, and so had you. And this very tall woman arrived in, you remember?
She was very tall.
And she had this most beautiful face and the wonderful bone structure. And she had gorgeous eyes and she had very sallow skin. And we were not aware that she was so ill. I mean, this woman came in and she was so healthy and full of joys of life, and it's so delighted to meet us.
As we were only 3 singers, when you hear a voice like that, it gives you the impetus to sing better. I don't think I sang so well as I did when I was singing with her in her performance.
But the first night we were so enraptured with her voice. Adele and I were beside her, and spontaneously, the two of us, we started to applaud. Do you remember?
Well, she was forward and applauded.
We were just overwhelmed with her voice.
On the opening night, Kathleen sent a gift of cufflinks to Sir John with a note.
For my beloved maestro, with my devoted love, and oh, so many thanks for making an Orpheus dream come true.
To hear her singing Kefaro, it was life. I mean, this woman knowing that she was dying. And in her eyes, she didn't cry, but there were tears. She had beautiful eyes.
What is life to me without thee? What is left if thou art dead?
The second performance, something went wrong with the bones of her leg.
The bone in her leg actually fractured, but there were very few people in the audience that knew this had happened. She just stood in one position, and somehow or other, by some sort of telepathy, I think she made everyone realize that she couldn't move and that they would have to come to her, which is what they instinctively did.
You know what she said to me on stage? She said, I can't bear the pain. So I put my hand out like that. I said, you lean on it. And then we walked off to the side of the stage, and they called an ambulance, but she wanted to go back on stage. And I said, all right, so we walked back on, and we just did the finale.
What had happened was that she'd had secondary breast cancer, which the cells had gone into her bones, and that's a thing that happens even nowadays. And the cells weaken the bone, and particularly if the bone is a weight-bearing bone, like the hip bone, if it gets very weak, it can crack and fracture. And that's what happened. Must have been excruciatingly painful. And to have just continued and managed to have finished and got off the stage, it's just... that's real grit, that is.
I couldn't walk the next day and had to be carried down our stairs at great risk to my life by 2 perspiring, hefty ambulance men. And here I am, furious at letting Covent Garden down, furious at missing my investiture, but counting my blessings in that I am here in wonderful hands. Much love to all my buddies. Kath.
In June, Kathleen was awarded one of the highest musical honours, the Royal Philharmonic Society's Gold Medal. A month later, she underwent a further operation in which she pinned all her hopes and prayers. On the 8th of October 1953, Kathleen Ferrier died peacefully in her sleep.
In 1953, when I first came to London as a student, I remember coming up out of the underground station at Oxford Circus and being confronted by the newspaper adverts that this famous singer had died, and I knew exactly who it was. And I felt very sad because I knew I wasn't going to have the opportunity ever to get to know her. And it was a sort of cut-off period. Something was very definitely over, and I think all my generation felt that.